Calamity version 1.0 released on June 1st, 2016. The initial release contained 3 bosses: Desert Scourge, Slime God, and the Devourer of Gods. Later that same month, we got Calamitous Clone. The next month brought Plaguebringer Goliath, and then Cryogen and the Evil 2 bosses the month after that. September brought Yharim, December brought Leviathan, and then in February of 2017 we got Providence and her Guardians, all 3 Sentinels, and Supreme Calamitous. Later that month we got Dragon Folly and Brimstone Elemental, and then in April, Crabulon and Ravager. All of this was in the first year. In that time we went from just 3 bosses in the initial release to 20. By November of 2018, we had nearly every single current Calamity boss already in the game in just the first 2 years. This isn't even accounting for all the scrapped or removed bosses during this time as well. 2019 came and went without any new bosses. Then in April of 2020 we got Old Duke. Then another long hiatus until November of 2021 when Drayden and the Exomex released. 2022 came and went without any new bosses. Then 2023. Then 2024. Then 2025. Despite Calamity's early frenzy of adding bosses, it seems like the developers' interest in adding new ones is completely gone. However, even though the devs don't seem to want to do it, the community certainly does. In particular, there's one boss that the community seems to greatly desire that the Calamity devs seem unwilling to implement. I am, of course, referring to Calamity's implied final boss, Godseeker Yharim. Yharim is central to the overarching plot of Calamity, and the character that most of the conflict in the mod centers around. Several of the boss lore items and Drayden logs hint at Yharim and his crusades against the gods. Hell, he's even the narrator of the lore items that each boss drops. It's pretty safe to call him the central antagonist of the mod, with even the final lore item directly challenging you. It seems like he should be the developer's #1 priority to implement as soon as possible. So why don't they? Why, after a decade, is Calamity still missing its final boss? Why do the developers refuse to give the community what they want? Before answering that question, there is another matter that needs to be discussed. Unfortunately, during the production of this video, there is a controversy involving Ozatron, the lead developer of Calamity, and a Yharim-related add-on. A lot of misinformation was spread by third parties, and everything was massively blown out of proportion. To clear everything up, I read both Oz's and the add-on devs' accounts of what happened, and I will be providing the sequence of events. This part is just the facts, and I will not do any analysis until the end. I'll tell you when the facts stop and the analysis begins. To make sure I didn't exclude any important details or misrepresent any issues, I also had Ozatron and 2 of the add-ons developers, Lion8Cake and flye.name, read this over, and they all agreed that the following information was accurate and not omitting anything. It started with a developer on a small team, Lion8Cake, Lion, reaching out to Ozatron, saying the team wanted to make an add-on mod for Calamity to add Yharim as the final boss. Oz and Lion had already contacted each other before, but this was the first time that the Yharim add-on specifically came up. Without consulting the rest of the Calamity team, Ozatron told Lion that Yharim was property of Azafir LLC and threatened legal action if the add-on were to be published. We'll get to what Azafir LLC is in a moment. He did not send a DMCA, and he did not actually pursue legal action. He simply threatened legal action. Lion said the add-on team would disband, and that appeared to be the end of the conversation. The morning afterwards, the issue was brought up by other developers of the Calamity team, who then discussed with Oz to determine an appropriate response. While this was being discussed among the Calamity team, a screenshot of Oz's initial threat was spreading around various Discord servers, including those of popular add-ons, such as Wrath of the Gods and Fables. The screenshot was then posted to Twitter by a third party who shall not be named, who is also not on the Calamity team, or the Yharim add-on team. When this happened, another one of the add-on devs, flye.name, Flye, reached out to the unnamed party who made the Twitter post, and requested that they close it, which they did. At this point, discussion among the Calamity dev team had completed, and they agreed upon a response. They concluded that Oz's threat was an unjustified overreaction. Ozatron reached out to Flye and apologized for the legal threat, and explained the Calamity devs' new agreed stance in detail. The add-on devs agreed that they would not add Yharim, and would reuse the existing assets for a different, non-Calamity related project. Both parties were satisfied with no other disagreements, and the matter appeared to be settled. The screenshot of Oz's threat continued to spread though, reaching Reddit, creating the current shit show. Lion later made this comment on a Reddit post about the situation, saying that the matter had been resolved, quelling some of the outrage among the public. And that concludes the pure facts section of the video. Now, I'm moving on to my own thoughts and analysis of the situation. For starters, just about everyone agrees that Oz went too far here, including Ozatron himself, and I do too. It was just a fan project, and I don't think the add-on developers meant any harm by it. The threat of legal action was completely unwarranted. It's also worth noting that Ozatron acted on his own behalf here, not on behalf of Calamity or the Calamity development team. I do think it's good to some degree that the Calamity community is concerned about another Fabsol-like lead dev emerging, but Oz is not, and I have a lot of reasons to think that. First of all, after Fabsol was removed, Ozatron was unanimously chosen by the Calamity developers to be the new leader. After how much turmoil the devs suffered under Fabsol, I find it very hard to believe that they would elect someone who behaved similar to him in any way. And keep in mind that the devs have actually worked with Oz for years, so they know what he's like. Secondly, Calamity is pretty open to fan projects in general. If Ozatron was really a tyrannical, overprotective owner, would he really allow something like Calamity to exist? Calamity is another fan project, specifically aimed at implementing Calamity features into Hightail. The Cal devs, and by extension Oz, had no issues with that existing, nor do they have any issues with the countless other add-ons that people have made over the years. Oz does not harbor malice towards them, and neither does Calamity in general. Lastly, I've personally worked with Ozatron. As I said at the start of this section, this drama happened while this video was in production. By that time, Oz had already proofread the script and was fine with a lot of my criticisms of Calamity, and had a lot of useful feedback. He came across as constructive and cooperative, not tyrannical or demanding. I know, personal experience isn't the strongest evidence, but I think it shows that his behavior towards the other Calamity developers that got him elected leader extends beyond just those developers. He certainly overstepped his bounds by threatening a fan project like that, but as we will discuss in this video, Yharim is a major part of Calamity's identity, and I can understand the fear of losing control of him. To me, it seems like Oz's threat was just a lapse in judgment, not the mask slipping or revealing his true self, or anything worse. He wanted to protect Yharim, and in a moment of perceived threat to him, made a dumb decision. Also, please do not harass anyone involved in this situation. Don't harass the add-on developers, don't harass Oz, don't harass the person who made the Twitter post, and don't harass the Calamity developers. There were a lot of misunderstandings by those not involved, so my only advice is to be careful of screenshots that seem to paint someone in an uncharacteristically villainous light. Oz isn't 100% innocent in this, but the character assassination by the Reddit and Twitter communities was completely uncalled for. I guess while we're here, we may as well discuss Azafir LLC, as Oz mentioned it in his legal threat. It's a company that was founded by Oz shortly after Fabsol was removed from the mod, primarily for legal and tax reasons relating to Calamity's business deals. Ozatron is technically the sole employee of it, but having a company allows him to do things like pay the other developers as freelancers, reducing the overall tax burden, and increasing the amount of money available to pay the developers. It's not some evil, scary corporate entity that's out to silence any unapproved mention of Calamity. It's just there to have a legitimate legal entity for Calamity's IP. Ozatron likely mentioned it in his threat to make it sound more legitimate, or to make the warning more likely to be heeded. But again, I do think that making this threat at all was a lapse in judgment, and not the reason why Ozatron created this company. After this whole debacle, Oz has pledged to clarify how exactly Calamity, its assets, code, and future concepts may or may not be used publicly on the website and the GitHub. He also wants to be more open about the existence of Azafir LLC. Azafir LLC is already mentioned in the footer of the Calamity website, and he says he wants to add it to the GitHub license as well. Hopefully these changes should make it clearer where exactly the line is to prevent future confusion, as well as stop people from getting the wrong idea when they hear the phrase Azafir LLC. And with that out of the way, we can finally move on. Special thanks to Lion and Flye for their input, as well as proofreading this part of the script. Additionally, they worked to put out this fire when it originally occurred, preventing it from spiraling any further, so they deserve credit for that too. The fact that Calamity lets so many other fan projects exist undisturbed shows that an add-on specifically attempting to add Yharim really struck a nerve with Ozatron. Yharim is very important to Calamity, but if he's so important to Calamity, then why do the developers refuse to implement him after a decade? It's taken so much time that a team of fans even offered to add their own Yharim. So why is the Calamity dev team itself taking so long? To answer that question, I decided to consult the most direct source for the developers' reasoning, the developers themselves. In particular, I reached out to Ozatron, who I've already introduced, Lilac, a former project organizer for a decent chunk of Calamity's history, and LordMetarex, one of the longest-standing developers still on the project. I asked them a handful of questions to get some insight into the developers' mindset and thoughts about Yharim. They knew this would be made into a video, by the way, so they knew their responses would be public. These interviews were also done individually, so they couldn't influence each other's answers. To get an idea of how experienced they truly are with the mod, I started by asking them, when did you start working on Calamity?
November 2018, though I was voted as the lead programmer in May 2019 and became the full team leader in May 2025.
I started working on Calamity around March or April 2018, initially as a tester before I moved over to organizing the efforts of the Astral update after some key developers had left. I continued to work as lead organizer for the mod through 2019 and 2020 until I left the team early 2025.
I am a developer for the Calamity mod for a little over 8 years now.
They know what they're talking about. They're about as tenured and experienced as you can get outside of asking Fabsol himself, which I'm not about to do. Moving on to the topic of this video, when was the idea of Yharim as a final boss first conceived?
I'm pretty sure this happened before I was around. Yharim had some strange first iterations that I've seen mention of that predate my time on the team. Early on in old lore, he was much closer to Pontiff Sulivan from Dark Souls 3. He did a lot of cursing people, using evil magic, making them go insane, and so on. He gradually shifted from evil mastermind that ruined the world to badass but evil god-slaying tyrant king of the jungle as the old lore evolved.
That I do not know for certain. As far as I remember, Yharim was conceived in boss progression as the Tyrant King Yharim in the pre-1.2 days.
I would almost dare to say from the very beginning. Since ever joining the community around April of 2017, talks about Yharim being the final boss was floating around.
So yeah, the idea of Yharim being the capstone of Calamity has been around for ages at this point. He even predates the most tenured developers of the mod. However, I've always found it a bit strange that Yharim was thought of this early and then kinda just left on the back burner. Especially during Calamity's early days, when tons of bosses were being added, it seems rather odd that Fabsol decided not to add Calamity's final boss. I was genuinely curious about this, so I asked, why, when Fabsol was adding tons of bosses in the first couple years of Calamity, did he not add Yharim?
To put it bluntly, you'd have to ask Fabsol. I don't know and I do not want to guess.
Lore was a pretty big factor, even early on in the mod's life, so the plan was to lay out the story first, since all of it would lead to Yharim at the end.
Fabsol's general work ethic was that he wanted to have completed sprites first before testing out attacks, plus with the pre-1.2 ethic of just copy and pasting vanilla assets and codes. And Yharim was kind of put aside before development hell kicked in. His main spriter at the time was Zigams, who did a majority of the work of the sprites, and eventually Yharim was set aside for later.
While this is a question that I personally wanted to know for a while now, I really don't want to go rebuilding a burned bridge with Fabsol just for the sake of asking one question that ultimately doesn't matter to Calamity's current development. Sorry. Regardless, judging by Metarex's and Lilac's answers, it seems even Fabsol knew it was too early to add Yharim, so he just didn't. More pressing issues drew his attention, kicking the can down the road. Moving on from Yharim's lack of development to his actual development, I probed, how far did Yharim ever get in development? And in a similar vein, are there any concrete plans for him, or is the only thing confirmed that he'll be in the Dragonary?
He's had a couple of sprites here and there and quite meticulously planned out fight and arena mechanics that the new team is still in agreement with, to my understanding. No attempts have ever been made to put him in-game, even as a test dummy, but the planning has been consistently laid out for years at this point. There are concrete plans for nearly every aspect of his in-game presentation. Yes, he will be in the Dragonary. That hasn't changed.
I don't believe Yharim had ever gotten terribly far in development besides Fabsol's plans for the fight, as well as concept art that Polly and I had done as well. Karubi as well did some sprites for Yharim back when he was going to be like an NPC. By the time we got to 1.4 and the sheer advancement of modding at the time, there was a lot in the mod that needed to be cleaned up first, and it fell to the wayside. I remember the plans for Yharim were to have him like a Senator Armstrong fight before moving to something like Munos Prime. To put it bluntly, Fabsol did have a habit of borrowing from other media that was his special interests at the time, namely Metal Gear Rising and Ultra Kill.
If we're talking about way back, then mostly concept discussions? I think I even saw discussions about the idea for him to be riding on the back of a mechanical dragon of all things. But yeah, that was before I joined the team. The only thing I will say right now is that they will be in the Dragonary.
Honestly, those answers surprised me. When I started writing the script, I thought that Yharim either had no concrete plans, or any concrete plans in the past were long abandoned. I always thought he was just a bridge to be crossed when the dev team finally got there. I suppose it's only natural to be thinking about what Yharim might be like when it's been so many years. Still though, Yharim does apparently have non-zero progress, but don't expect for any of that to be public anytime soon. Although having plans is great, being able to execute them is a separate matter entirely, so I followed. Do you feel confident that the team could add Yharim into the game, and make him good if they wanted to? And the results were pretty unanimous.
Absolutely.
From what I've seen of the Brainstorm update, I have faith in the current team to be able to do a pretty cool Yharim fight.
I do believe we can add them to the mod, especially nowadays with the current members on board. When we get to him, we will have more experience in our belts from refining and reworking bosses, meaning we can make Yharim into a fun experience as well.
Calamity's development has been in a much healthier position ever since Fabsol was removed, so I can definitely understand the team's confidence. Especially given how good the new Brain of Cthulhu and dogfights are, along with all the weapon reworks, the developers' capabilities have certainly been proven. Since they feel like the dev team is capable of delivering a polished Yharim fight, there must be other factors at play for why they don't want to add him now. So I asked, what major updates and reworks do you think Calamity needs before Yharim is added?
For starters, I think everyone agrees that we need the new Yaron before we could do Yharim at all. I personally would also want to finish the Sunken Sea overhaul and probably at least one other biome, perhaps the Crags or Astral. I don't think the Distortion needs to come before Yharim, but I will not unveil any other update plans or scheduling at this time.
I left the team in early 2025, so I don't know for sure what the plan is for what needs to be added before Yharim, but I want to say once Yaron is overhauled and resprited, the work could be done to make a Yharim fight regardless if the Eerie is done or not. I personally don't think the devs team should be locked into reworking biomes forever, and should be allowed to do new things in between or during it.
There's still a lot we want to do as a team. I think the best answer would be whenever the team is satisfied and ready to tackle this milestone. But what these updates may include, only time may tell.
Oz and Lilac agreed that at the very least, a Yaron rework is necessary. This implies that Yharim's fight would tie in with Yaron in some way, or at least that Yaron would help frame Yharim's fight. Canonically, Yaron takes about a decade to reform after being killed, so he won't be able to make a grand re-entrance in Yharim's fight, but he must play some sort of role in order to be a prerequisite for adding Yharim. Even though Yaron is the bare minimum, there's still a lot of other things that the developers want to implement, namely the biome reworks, although Lilac noted that there might be other things as well. But why do they need to do all these reworks anyway? What's stopping them from just reworking Yaron now and then adding Yharim ASAP? I inquired, why do you want to wait until the mod is completed to add Yharim?
Historically, the concern was that adding Yharim would kill Calamity's perpetual hype wave. If the mod was actually finished like Thorium, it could have potentially devastating effects on both the community and the development team. There have also been concerns in the team that doing Yharim at any point before the end would mean we would look back on him in a few years and want to change him because he's not good enough. As evidenced by my previous answer, I no longer believe that indefinitely delaying Yharim is the correct course of action. Yharim is an essential aspect of Calamity, but he does not actually need every single other thing to be done before we add him.
That I don't know for certain. As far as I've seen until I left the team, that was always going to be the final thing that was added in the mod. That's just how it's always been.
Simple. There's a story to tell. As people may have noticed, the lore has changed throughout the decade, and the lore impacts Yharim too. It is like reading a book. You do not want to immediately jump to the final 10 pages since you would leave out all the context that built up to these final pages. As we continue to shape the story of Calamity, we shape the story of Yharim as well, bit by bit.
I do find it interesting that the lead dev isn't entirely opposed to the idea of adding Yharim earlier than dead last, although it doesn't seem like this sentiment is universal across the team. I completely agree with Metarex's statement about Calamity's story though. It's barely present in the game, and adding the finale now would severely undercut the impact of it. I'll get into that more later. Not much else to say other than he might happen before the very end, but no matter how you slice it, there's still a lot of other things that need to be done first. Before I started writing the script, I had a theory for why the devs weren't working on Yharim. I knew about the incompleteness of the mod and the planned biome reworks and such, but I speculated that another major contributor was wanting to avoid killing the hype and losing relevance as a result. Oz already somewhat answered this in the previous question, but I wanted to ask it directly as well. Is killing the hype a contributor for why the team doesn't want to make him right now? That is, once Yharim is added, do you think that people will be excited for a bit, and then move on?
Killing the hype is a very real concern. Nobody on the dev team is really afraid of Calamity faltering if we release Yharim, and we know we would make him a great final boss. However, there will be far less for the fans to look forward to if we did. It would also highlight how incomplete Calamity is, which wouldn't be great for our public image.
Lilac didn't have anything to say.
By then, Calamity will be very different. The mod has gone through pretty big changes over the years. Adding content, removing content, reworking dozens and dozens of weapons, adding silly things, all of that. But I do think people will be excited when we get to this Godseeker eventually. And yeah, people may move on. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing, as long as we have fun making something worth remembering.
It does seem like killing the hype is a concern, but as we've discussed with the other questions, it's certainly not the primary concern. The fear of losing relevance isn't universal among the devs either, as shown by MetaRex's response. To finish off, I gave an all-encompassing question to capture any other thoughts the devs felt like sharing about Yharim as a whole. Is there anything else you would like to be publicly known about Yharim, or the devs' approach towards him?
The only other thing I would like to share about Yharim is how much I enjoy the propaganda aspect of how we've fleshed out the lore over time. Up to this point, the Calamity community has had very limited access to perspectives on the events of the story that aren't Yharim's, and everyone has come to take his account of things as gospel. Sure, he's an unreliable narrator. For example, he doesn't talk about the Hallow, but for lack of anything else to go on, people generally agree with Yharim's takes. The truth is that Yharim and Yharon are significantly more evil than most players realize. Having delayed Yharim as much as we have has put us in a beautiful position that mimics real life. The community's currently well-established perspective on the Calamity world is going to evolve beyond Yharim's closed worldview as they discover alternative viewpoints and conflicting information. In essence, we can have a real-life analog to Yharim's propaganda machine breaking down as his empire fell apart, which I hope at least some people take as a learning experience.
My concept art isn't official, and I will likely be tweaking it anyway.
If there is anything the public should know about Yharim in regards to lore, I would let the lore writers be the messenger. In regards to boss fight development, I do not really have anything to bring forward myself.
Thank you to Ozatron, Lilac, and LordMetarex for answering my questions, as well as proofreading the script. In addition to their insights, I want to provide my own analysis on Yharim, and why he's been taking an eternity. We've established that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but why exactly is that? To answer that question, we're gonna need to take a look at Calamity's early days. As I mentioned in the intro, the early days are a flurry of boss activity. We got 20 bosses in under 1 year. Were these bosses any good? Well, a couple old Calamity versions have been immortalized as versions of Calamity Classic. These are basically just ports of old versions of the mod to modern T mod loader, letting you see what a glorious mess it was in the early days. The two oldest versions of Calamity Classic are 1.0 and 1.2. While writing the script for this video, another version, 1.4.2, also released. However, that version is a bit closer to modern Calamity than the boss flurry in the first year, so I'll be examining 1.2 instead, originally released in August of 2017. It should be good enough to get an overall feel for the content standard back then. I don't want to dwell on this too much, so to summarize, they're not very good. Think modern Yharon is a Fishron clone? Well, this old version of Yharon literally directly steals Fishron's Phase 3 pattern. 1 dash, a teleport, then 2 dashes, a teleport, 3 dashes, a teleport, 4 dashes, a teleport, and repeat. Plaguebringer has the same horizontal dashes as Queen Bee, and literally summons minions in the exact same way. Dog is a much faster, really annoying laser spam destroyer clone, even with probes to boot. Supreme Calamitous doesn't feel too much like the Retinizer clone she is, but that's mainly because you're too busy being overwhelmed by 500 million other projectiles to notice it. Old Calamity sucked. To be fair though, content standards were significantly lower as well. People weren't really expecting that much from modded Terraria, and the mods around that time were much more vanilla-esque than modern mods. And so, more and more content was added, but it wasn't really anything too interesting or enjoyable. Wide as a lake, deep as a puddle. I would argue that it honestly wasn't that much of a problem at the time. The problem was more that they were never really updated to match the evolving content standards. The reason I'm putting so much emphasis on this is to show just how Calamity ended up in the current state it's in. Content was added, and then just kinda left to rot. Fabsol's iron grip over the bosses certainly wasn't helping either, as he maintained a monopoly on most bosses during his reign. Any reworks he did were usually token, and didn't meaningfully change the fight most of the time. And if he did, there was a chance of making the bosses significantly worse to fight, like the Bountiful Harvest Master Mode reworks. To give Fabsol some credit though, the modern Calamity bosses by him are a big improvement over their classic versions, but it's a pretty low bar to clear, and a lot of them still aren't very good. To show you exactly what I mean, let's look at modern Calamity. As I said, content standards were significantly lower back in the day, so it's not really fair to compare the old bosses from 2017 to the current version of Calamity. However, what I can do is compare the bosses within modern Calamity. I really think Brainstorm highlighted just how jarring the quality gap is between the bosses made by Fabsol and the ones that weren't. Brainstorm notably reworked Brain of Cthulhu and the Devourer of Gods, so let's take a look at them, as well as their surrounding Fabsol-made bosses. Modern Brain of Cthulhu is a highly engaging fight with a lot of carefully designed attacks that form a pretty fun and unique experience. The design feels inspired, and it plays into the concept of Brain while managing to fix the problems with older versions. This rework was primarily done by Big E, and in my opinion, it's the best Calamity fight in pre-hard mode by a mile. Now think about the quality of Crabulon, a boss that starts with some very half-hearted lunges and quickly devolves into projectile spam and insanely fast attacks, in pre-hard mode. Eater of Worlds is a stupid, unfun projectile spam nightmare. Perforators are there too, and they are so laughably boring that here they are at 400% speed. Absolute snooze fest. There's also Slime God, with AI ripped straight from Biomimics along with being one of the buggiest fights in the game. The disparity in quality is truly astonishing. Let's look at the Devourer too. New Dog, made by Doze, is a pretty fun fight, managing to truly capture the feeling of being chased by a serpent titled the Devourer of Gods while not being too overly oppressive. The balance between evading dashes and precision laser walls make it a simple, but still very enjoyable experience, with Malice Mode offering a much harder, but still very fun and fair experience if you want a real challenge. Now look at the bosses surrounding Dog. Old Duke is a very widely hated and controversial boss by most of the player base. Polter is a boring Plantera clone that has so many ways to cheese it and is so easy that plenty of people beat it on their first try when they get ambushed by it while roaming the dungeon halls. Void is a strange case. It's one of the most unique bosses in Calamity, but it's very counterintuitive and also not very liked by the community. While I don't think Void is a bad boss per se, the fact it's so hated by so many people implies that it probably should be reworked at some point. By comparison, Cygnus and Weaver are so pathetically easy and do basically nothing and have no interesting attacks. In fact, they're so boring that I added this sentence to the script just so that I could show you how boring and uneventful their fights are on screen for a bit longer. As for bosses after Dog, Yharim, while not bad in my opinion, does still have remnants of that damn Fishron AI. Exomechs are a different story. They are utterly terrible. Pretty much the entire dev team hates the current state of Exomechs. They simultaneously strike a balance of being too hard for first-timers because it's not clear at all how you're supposed to dodge their attacks, while also being way too easy for veteran players because when you finally do learn how to dodge their attacks, they pose absolutely no threat whatsoever. Even though they're meant to be a team of massive war machines coordinating their attacks to effectively hunt you down, they literally get easier the more of them are on screen. They literally have anti-synergy with each other. And remember, these guys are supposed to be on the same tier as Escal. It's hilarious how Exomechs are treated with the same weight as her despite how terrible their fight is in comparison. Speaking of Escal, I do think she's pretty good, but even then you can still see the remains of the Retinizer AI. It's not a deal breaker, but it's kinda sad how the final boss of the mod still has to resort to copying vanilla AI. The new standard that Brain and Dog set highlights just how staggering the quality gap is between Calamity's bosses. Now imagine that gap, but applied to an entire section of the game. Adding Yharim isn't just about his boss fight, it's about the atmosphere, the Dragonary, the finale of Calamity. Adding Yharim now would just shine an even brighter light on just how unpolished most of Calamity is at the moment. It would be unsatisfying, a dramatic end to a story that is almost completely separate from the gameplay. It wouldn't be a cathartic conclusion to a long, hard-fought journey, it would just be a finale without a story. That, combined with the fact that a lot of people will likely lose interest in the game when Yharim is finally added, and it's no wonder that the dev team is in no hurry to add him. That brings me to a more practical reason why adding Yharim now is a bad idea. Hype, mystery, and intrigue. If you'll forgive the topic whiplash, let me ask you, what made Five Nights at Freddy's so popular? Whether you love or hate FNAF, its popularity is undeniable, so what makes people so interested in it? There are a lot of potential reasons, but what I think allowed FNAF to survive after the novelty of killer animatronics wore off was the lore. I'm not going to try and explain it or say that the FNAF lore is good or coherent or on the same level as Calamity or anything, but there is one critical thing they have in common. Both games leave big questions unanswered, and that makes them a lot more engaging in the long run. It allows people to theorize, to speculate, to imagine. It makes them feel like they're putting the pieces together themselves. Each entry in the FNAF saga answered some questions from the previous games, while also raising 10 more. It's a cycle of leaving questions in the air to keep the audience from ever feeling like the series was ever truly solved, guaranteeing their interest in future installments. This strategy worked swimmingly for FNAF. After all, people still make FNAF theories to this day. Bringing this back to Terraria, Calamity obviously does not have the luxury of multiple installments in an ongoing series. They have a heavily unfinished mod for a fairly old game, and a very long update history. Most of the lore questions in Calamity are spelled out quite clearly by the developers, even if a lot of them aren't really explained in-game. There isn't much mystery in Calamity, except for Yharim. We know his motivation for his crusade against the gods, and we also get hints of his personality and worldview from the lore items he authors throughout the game. He seems to believe that what he's doing is morally correct, yet he's rather blasé about you murdering Yaron. Or at least, indifferent enough to not help his best friend as he's about to fall to you. I'm not a literary analysis expert, but to me it seems like Yharim is rather conflicted, and I'm curious how this could manifest in his fight. Is he at peace being killed by your hand? Does he want vengeance for Yaron? Does he regret his path through life? Will he have a last-minute revelation that he was the bad guy? More generally, what will his fight be like? What attacks will he use, and how will they be thematic with how he's portrayed in the lore? Will there be callbacks to other enemies you faced, or hints planted throughout the game? How silly will the fight be in Get Fixed Boy? Could you recruit Calamitas, Permafrost, and/or a Midas to help you in the final battle? To be clear, everything I just said is pure speculation, but that's the point. Keeping details of Yharim ambiguous or unknown allows audience speculation to run wild, and they can form their own unique theories about what Yharim will really be like, which can often entertain them more than anything the devs could possibly provide. When Yharim is finally added, the wave function collapses, and you're left with only one true answer. Even if the version of Yharim we get is really good, and brings a satisfying, cathartic end to Calamity, it likely won't leave much room for speculation. It will have a definitive end, and that's it. People will enjoy it for a while, and then move on. Not adding Yharim gives Calamity an open question, allowing the audience's imagination to flourish, even in his absence. Not answering every question in a story can make an audience engage with it a lot more, and that gives it staying power. To be fair though, the mysteries around Yharim are definitely not the only reason people care about Calamity, but I firmly believe that he does play a role. Oz noted that killing the hype is a very real concern, and I would probably be concerned as well. They have the most popular Terraria mod on their hands, and I imagine that losing the majority of their audience is a genuine fear. It's far from the only reason they don't want to add Yharim, but it gives them further motivation to take their sweet time and finish the mod before seriously attempting to implement him into the game. And take their sweet time, they do. We've talked about how the devs have a lot more stuff they want to do before adding Yharim, and that adding him too early may be detrimental for the mod's health, but Calamity has already been around for a full decade, yet it's still a very long road ahead. Why is there still so much more that needs to be done before Yharim is added? This is straying away from Yharim, and more just asking about Calamity as a whole. So, more generally then, why does Calamity take so much time to develop? There's a lot of different reasons, and I don't really think I can do this question justice without actually being on the dev team myself. But as an outsider, I can still give my opinion and observations for why Calamity development takes as long as it does. As mentioned previously, Fabsol was a pretty big contributor for this. He was a hindrance to development and often failed to be an effective leader in any meaningful way. We can see this in the 22 incident at the end of 2022. This is where 21 developers left the mod over a handful of reasons, with Fabsol as a self-admitted contributor. Additionally, remember when I was talking about how early Calamity focused on quantity over quality? Well, the current dev team is reaping the whirlwind Fabsol sowed. It's hard to focus on adding new content when there's still mountains and mountains of content that needs to be reworked. The fact that the most hyped update in the mod's history is called the Sunken Sea Overhaul, implying the focus is on polishing old content rather than adding new content, is pretty telling. And the mod suffered for 9 years under Fabsol. It's honestly a miracle that Calamity managed to survive for so long, so the fairly slow development for most of the mod's history shouldn't be too surprising. I think another part of it just comes down to the infrequency of updates. Regardless of how big an update is, development can still appear slow from the outside if there's a long hiatus without updates, even if the team posts teasers. I mainly felt this in the lead up to the Brainstorm update. The devs promised a lot of things over the course of Brainstorm's development, but without being able to play them for yourself, it can seem like there's no tangible progress being made. It just doesn't feel real. Additionally, once the update does finally drop, it's pretty easy to be overwhelmed by the sheer volume of changes and overlook many of them, making the update appear even smaller. Thankfully though, the developers have said they don't want to have these super massive updates that take multiple years anymore. They want to have smaller, more frequent updates instead. Even though this might not actually speed up development of Calamity itself, it definitely won't feel as stagnant once we start getting more regular, smaller scope updates. Lastly, and most importantly, Calamity is just a big mod. It's easy to take for granted, but Calamity adds 26 bosses. Vanilla only has 19, and that's stretching it to include Deerclops and Dread Nautilus. Calamity also adds 757 weapons as of version 2.1.2. Vanilla has just 600, and that's including tools. Calamity's scope literally exceeds that of Vanilla Terraria, and Vanilla is still being worked on. To be fair though, Vanilla Terraria reached a reasonably complete state when 1.4 dropped, after 9 years of development, but that's with a team of paid, full-time, professional developers. The Calamity team is a group of volunteers, with lives outside of developing this mod. The dev team has produced some truly incredible things, but the fact they're doing it for free means you can't expect it quickly. It's the Iron Triangle all over again. 2017 Calamity firmly fell into the fast and cheap category, as evidenced by how bad the bosses are in Calamity Classic. The current developer team is shooting for the good and cheap category, but that means it's not going to be fast. While proofreading this script, Ozatron also wanted to share his thoughts on the Iron Triangle and its relationship with Calamity's development.
After I took over management of the Patreon, I instated new rules about how donator money gets used for the project. Since then, we've been trying to break the Iron Triangle with development bounties, and it's been very successful at moving major updates along.
This is referring to the way that Calamity's Patreon now works. Under the old system, Fabsol got 100% of the money. After Fabsol was removed, the Calamity dev team made their own new Patreon. In this new system, rather than all the money being funneled to a single individual, the money is now being put towards development bounties. The developers can implement critically needed features to earn these bounties, allowing for more than just the lead dev to be paid, and also rewarding those who do important work. So if you want to help Calamity develop faster, there's the link. And you can rest easy that the money isn't going into Fabsol's or any other singular person's pocket. I started playing this mod in early 2020, and even as someone who thoroughly loves Calamity, I will freely admit that modern Calamity is uncomfortably close to how it was when I started. There definitely have been some major landmark changes, but most of the mod still feels like it did 6 years ago. Most of the bosses feel pretty similar, and most of the biomes feel relatively unchanged as well. From an outside perspective, the development has felt pretty slow. However, between Fabsol, the infrequent updates, and the sheer size of the mod, the first one has already been rectified, and as mentioned, the developers want to provide more frequent updates, fixing the second one. Unfortunately, there isn't really a workaround for the mod being as big as it is outside of removing content, but removing content is pretty unpopular, so that's not going to happen. The takeaway is that Yharim isn't coming anytime soon, and for good reasons, but that doesn't mean that Calamity is going to feel static in the meantime. Moving forward, updates are going to be more frequent, with a higher bar for quality, as demonstrated by their reworks in Brainstorm. Not just the bosses, but also the biomes and the weapons, and the general presentation of the mod. There's still a lot of work to be done, but I do believe that the Calamity dev team is more than capable of delivering on the years of expectations. Calamity is a pretty old mod, with a very long history that I only scratched the surface of in this video. Yharim is one of Calamity's oldest hype generators, and the fact that people still care about him shows he's done a pretty good job at that over the last decade. The developers do care about the mod and its health, and they fully understand that adding Yharim now would not be a good idea. It wouldn't be satisfying, it wouldn't bring a true finale to Calamity, and all it would do is kill a ton of the hype for the mod while highlighting the mod's inadequacies even more. They would also likely look back on him in a couple years and feel the need to rework him with all their additional experience, wasting more time. Not to mention all the work that would actually go into making Yharim, his fight, theme, loot pool, balancing, sprites, dragonary, and everything else that would require a ton of effort. Effort that many aspects of the mod desperately need instead. The reason that so many aspects of Calamity need such dire attention is complicated, but ultimately boils down to a tumultuous leadership for its first 9 years, and the sheer scope of the mod. The developers have made a commitment to smaller, more frequent, less scope-crept updates, but no matter how you look at it, it's clear that Yharim isn't coming for a long, long time. There will still be plenty of things to look forward to in the meantime, though. In fact, as of the making of this video, almost no boss is safe from potentially getting a rework in the future, and many of them are confirmed to have a full-scale rework eventually. As updates come out that rework these old fights, it will basically be like getting new bosses, like how New Brain of Cthulhu and Dog feel completely separate from any of their prior versions. It may be a long time until Yharim is finally added into Calamity, but there's a hell of a lot to look forward to while we wait. Something I've learned from my time as a content creator, as well as watching the Terraria and Calamity community's reactions to updates, is that it is literally impossible to please everyone. No matter how much effort you put into something, no matter how necessary a change is, and no matter how many people enjoy what you've made, there will always be some who are disappointed with your work. This is an inevitability of being an artist, and that's okay. If you endlessly worry about possible criticisms that some people may have with your content, you'll never get anything done. This isn't an excuse for releasing low-quality or blatantly offensive work, but it is a reminder that the cost of perfection is infinite. I guarantee you that some of the people watching this video will be disappointed with Yharim when he finally releases. Possibly even you. Obviously, you don't know who you are since Yharim isn't out yet, but how you respond if that day comes depends on your attitude towards Calamity updates. If all you ever cared about throughout the mod's history was Yharim, then Calamity will feel like one big waste of time. More than a decade-long build-up to nothing. It will retroactively sour the entire experience, and it will feel crushing and pointless. You only wanted one thing, and you didn't get what you wanted, so why did you even bother? Thinking this way puts a lot of eggs into one Yharim-shaped basket. On the other hand, if you enjoy Calamity updates now for what they are, and appreciate the mod even without its final boss, I assure you that Calamity will be more fulfilling in the long run, even if Yharim does disappoint you. The finale may not have been what you expected, but you were still able to have fun with the mod and appreciate the effort the developers were putting into Calamity to make it as good as it could be. The journey is more important than the destination. And if you don't like Calamity to begin with, then, well, I don't know how you got this far in the video or why you even care about Yharim at all, but thanks for listening, I guess. Of course, what I just said will only apply to a very small part of the community. I think the dev team is more than capable of making Yharim one of the best Terraria bosses ever, and I'm sure that most people will enjoy his fight a lot. But in case you are one of the people who will be disappointed, learn to enjoy the present, and what the developers are actually working on. You'll get a lot more out of the game that way. And even if you are in the majority who will love Yharim when he releases, still try to enjoy Calamity for what it is today, or you'll be waiting quite a long time just to fight a single boss in a mod for a game that will be 2 decades old. So yeah, that was my first attempt at a video essay, and it was an absolute nightmare to edit. It didn't help that my editing software was constantly fighting me too, causing some objects in the video to randomly forget their size and location, requiring manual correction. Overall, I think it came out pretty good though. Let me know what you think in the comments. I don't think I'll be making this kind of video super often given the sheer amount of effort this video took to make. I think it even overtook Mad Part 9 as the most work I've ever put into a video. I really hope you enjoyed this dive into one of Calamity's most frequently asked questions. I would also like to extend another thanks to Ozatron, Lilac, LordMetarex, Lion8Cake, flye.name, and also JFL for all the help with making this video. We'll return to our regularly scheduled challenge playthroughs next time, and it's gonna be quite malicious.